This edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
We are, and today we're talking about revitalizing commercial properties, or what color is this elephant? Now, I wondered about that because I was thinking like white elephant or money pits or whatever. Anyway, it was a bad one. Anyway, we're joined by Luke.
A lot of those lately.
Luke Sulfridge. And Luke is the executive director of Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council.
But here's the reason we want to talk to him today. We know he's super important. He's got a big title.
Yeah.
But we also know that he is rehabbing some historic buildings in downtown rural America. And that's the reason we really want to talk to him. Reimagining downtown life.
Yeah, and I know, Luke, I gave you your job title, so you may want to be very careful about some of the comments you make about the city of Marietta and the revitalization of your project. So welcome, Luke, and you tell us more about yourself.
Sure. Thank you for the warm introduction, and I may be a sucker for venturing into this space, but all of us need extra things to do.
Hey, you proved that when you bought the commercial property. So
that is definitely something you question on a regular basis, but it's a fun challenge most days.
So what is SOPEC? First off, we'll let you give a little plug for that organization.
Happy to. So SOPEC is a council of governments. We largely function as a regional energy office for 22 public entities across the state of Ohio, focused on sustainability. So we have 19 of the 20 EPA Clean Power Partnership communities are within our footprint. So every day is a little different, but we're helping communities do things like install solar on their roofs, helping them establish an EV charger infrastructure, helping them convert lights to LEDs and making those upgrades, or smart building design. Our bread and butter is what's called community choice aggregation, which is the ability of communities to shop and groups of communities to shop, in our case, for power for the baseload generation that they're procuring. And we've decided to make our program a green power program as core, as part of that component. So having a lot of fun, but really doing some exciting work. And thankfully, we've been really successful. This current year, we're saving our residents about $13 million across the communities we serve. So not only are we leading on green energy, but we're also saving residents money against what the standard service offer would be from the utilities. So a lot of great work and a lot of great partners, both within our staff team, but also our community leaders. We're governed by the communities we serve. That's part of the excitement for me. We have a lot of phenomenal leaders, whether it's county commissioners or mayors, or executive directors of other government entities. They're there with us and bring a lot of expertise with them. So it's a pretty exciting space, and definitely a collaborative environment, which is half the fun.
Well, one of the things I'm interested in is what has brought you to this point. So you're an executive director of a cool project, and you have a family, and you're young. In my years, you're young, and you are in a small town. So what's brought you to be here with those things in your toolkit?
The short answer would be insanity, but I'll duck that
From
answer.
Birth? Wait, from birth? Wait a minute.
No.
He woke up in 5th grade. He wrote a paper. I want to save communities money on their electric bill when I get older.
All right, that's not true. So let's skip to the answer here.
Yeah, so sustainability has always been a focus of mine, but I live in Appalachia. I'm native to Appalachia, and we've seen a lot of up and downs of our economy. My wife and I both have a strong interest in seeing the vibrancy of our downtowns, which are unique and an important critical asset moving forward. So we've been considering buying property if the right one came available for as long as I can remember. And we were actually helping flood relief, and one of the locals identified he's getting ready to put a property on the market, and we were the first suckers in line, I guess, to make an offer and to purchase it. So it's really a chance for us to have input in the future of the city, for us to do things like sustainability as we make the upgrades, for us to do historic preservation on the building. Our particular properties were built around 1859, so these are not new properties, even by Southeast Ohio standards. But we really see it as an exciting opportunity for us to be fully committed and invested in the community ourselves, and part of that long-term economic transition that's occurring.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about that is because, well, both Annie and I, we really love downtown Marietta, Ohio, where you're at, one of the oldest community in the Northwest Territory, right?
Right.
Yeah, it is the
So
capital of the territory.
there you go. And so you are a person who is doing this kind of renovation of a property, yet not, from my perspective anyway, solely motivated by I'm going to make a lot of money on this. So it kind of dovetails really nicely in with us where we're saying this is a beautiful community, a very walkable and vibrant downtown area. And here's a guy who's taking an old building that definitely needs some TLC and trying to bring that back up to some sort of, level of usefulness again. And I think that's just nice. So we want to see, okay, well, what motivated you to do that? And what kind of barriers have you seen as you're trying to do it? And what kind of, lovely things have happened as you've done this?
We've had the opportunity to sell the property several times. In fact, right after we bought it, a lot of folks, once they got a chance to look at it and really gave it a harder look, ours has an elevator, which is pretty unique. But a lot of folks had a lot of interest in it. But for us, being able to make sure that the building itself gets the proper restoration, ours is one of the few buildings downtown that still has wood floors. It still has, I wouldn't call them the original. I don't know when they were replaced, but I presume at some point they probably were, possibly not. In fact, one of my favorite features of the building, it has an old steam-powered engine in the basement that used to power the old elevator. I call the new elevator the one that was built somewhere around 1910, but the city got power in 1899. So we have a steam engine that used to power the old elevator that predates that, and the elevator itself had an old ratcheting system. As it would go up, it would ratchet up the wooden ratchet. So I think it really has to be a passion. I think looking at long-term investment, not just trying to flip properties, but really wanting to build something and create something. And Marietta is an exciting place. It does have a really complicated, long history. It's a super important part of Ohio's history, the U.S. history for that matter. The folks who settled the area insisted on slavery not being part of the Northwest Territory. They made some mistakes along the way. They did some really great things along the way. Some of the early founders protected the mounds. We didn't do such a great job protecting them in the 100 years that went beyond that. Some of them were preserved, some of them were not. But they recognized some things that were there, and there are definitely some missteps. But as a structure, and I think a lot of our communities here in Southeast Ohio, being a river town is both a blessing and a curse. You have to respect.
Let me back
Yeah,
you up
please.
there just a second. You mentioned the mounds, but
Yep.
most people listening may not really understand. There are a lot of
We had more,
Indian mounds within.
yeah. At one time, we had more than any other place in the world, and I believe roughly a third of them still exist. But some of them are pretty significant formations, including Bound Cemetery, which also has the designation of the cemetery with the most Revolutionary War soldiers buried in it. Because a lot of these folks came as Revolutionary War grants. We're in Washington County. That's not a coincidence. We also have what used to be called Sacravia. That's one of them we did lose, which was a giant wall that went down to the riverfront, the Muskingum River. And we probably have 4 or 5 other really significant mounds around town. But the old maps show us that there was a lot more there and a lot more part of this regional culture that goes back tens of thousands of years. So that's something that is all around us and informs, that we're definitely not the first folks here, even close to the first folks to settle these lands or to be caretakers of them.
Well, one of the things I would like to know more about is okay, so your motivation is you have a passion about an old building, but in our minds, the reason we wanted to invest in Marietta by buying a property is because we just really see it as a vibrant area and an area that's going from being an older population to younger population. And people are actively walking, riding bikes. It's just remarkable, like being in New York City, and yet you're in a town of 9,000-10,000 people. Anyway, so I'm just wondering, why would you choose Marietta, and what kind of payback do you expect from the building, and what do you want that building to do?
Yeah, the sound, it's very walkable by design. L'Enfant designed it, famous architect, and it was at one time even considered to be the U.S. Capitol. So the city had great ambitions. Cincinnati eventually eclipsed it as the river town south of Pittsburgh, but at one time we were the edge of the West, and have that pride accordingly. For us, my wife and I are both suckers for history, so we love that dynamic. And you're absolutely right. It is a very walkable city. It's a city where the arts community is very much alive. We have a very vibrant local theater that's been recently restored, community theater, a pretty resilient food culture. We even have, I believe, the last or the oldest remaining train bridge that actually turns. That's from the Civil War era, and it spins pivots actually on a pier. So there's just a lot of unique features. In fact, right upstream from that, the gentleman who designed the Panama Canal did his first, or one of the earlier ones, right next to that is the first navigable river as they channelized the Muskingum. We had that connection. So there's every stone you unturned, there's a connection that goes back and another layer to the onion. As far as our investment from a business standpoint, we have property on Front Street, so it is the main drag. We're roughly 600 feet from the Muskingum River, roughly 600 feet from the Ohio River. We were very attracted to that and prioritized getting the storefront up and running again. We've now successfully had other folks rent stores from us, so we're managing the property and rehabilitating more parts of the building while they run very successful businesses in the front. With a large glass showroom. Our building, for its longest period, was a Victorian furniture store, and has even a connection to the Bosworth family, who went on to do the work in the restoration of the, first Rockefeller was attracted to their talents, and was so impressed that he hired the same family to do the restoration of the Palace of Versailles. So there's actually a home in Paris called La Marietta still, as a direct result of that construction project. So, and every building has a story to tell. Ours was the first large commercial building downtown. It has all those soft bricks and early design techniques, but it also has a giant steel beam that until fairly recently, I assumed was put in early 20th century, but I recently visited the Customs House in Wheeling and realized that they had a steel beam on that property, I believe in the 1850s, if I recall. So that technology, at least in its early stages, goes back even further. So there's some really neat quirkiness to that. So for us, it's making the building as a business venture, finding it to a point where it can pay for itself, and some of the commercial development, and then being able to really take advantage of the full building itself. We have 24,000 square feet in our primary property. And we've purchased an additional building. It's even a bigger rehabilitation project next door since, but getting it commercially viable, getting the systems upgraded, getting it dry inside, getting all those basic things to make sure it can survive another 100 years. We just recently installed a heat pump. That was out of necessity, but for the air conditioning systems, but we had 200,000 BTU, 1966 Lennox. Jay, you'll have to tell me the efficiency rating of that, but I'm sure it was something pitiful. But we replaced that now with a heat pump installed by a local company here, and that was prior to the tax incentives that are coming into place now. But our tenant is absolutely thrilled, and for us, had a lot of confusion from the gas companies. We called them to tell them we no longer need gas service in the building, but just that ongoing monthly payment was about $50 a month just to have gas service, and so that's going to help the payback period for the heat pump itself to be a permanent replacement. And we'll probably install some others to build other comfort in other parts of the building, but I'm having a lot of fun.
Tell me what things you've done that you think provide resiliency for this building, which is in a tremendous flood zone, and sustainability. What are some of the things you've implemented or put into the building that are going to exhibit some sustainability leanings on your part?
Okay, but before you answer that, Luke, I want to let everyone know that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. So today we're joined by Luke Sulfridge, and he's going to be telling us why his building downtown Marietta is going to be the master showpiece of renewable energy and sustainability
and resiliency.
Yes, right?
There you go. No small feat here.
So explain away here, Luke. You are a renewable energy guy. What are you doing? Are you putting your money where your mouth is?
So it's the basics. I mean, starting out, it's replacing our light bulbs with LEDs, as basic as that is. That was our first undertaking, going through every corridor, replacing every light, upgrading those fixtures. After that, some of the more complicated things like the HVAC systems. So adding heat pumps, working on the insulation envelope. The envelope, and they had a very different concept of insulation back in the day, or lack thereof. But at the same time, the woodwork, the subfloors, is tongue and groove. So you have tongue and groove subfloors. So they're very tight envelopes on the way the buildings were constructed. Some architects would argue those early buildings are built to breathe, so there's different needs of the buildings. We really spent the first year or two as we fixed the have to fix parts of the building, and that's an ongoing process, listening to the building, looking for those little gems and secrets. One of the doors that I opened to an old elevator shaft on the backside had the remains of a container that they at one point had used to ship the furniture from the train station. Still had the old store stenciled on the side of it. You'll lose those things if you don't take your time and really look around. So I think that story is part of the resiliency as heritage tourism. From an energy perspective, we are looking at maximizing our rooftop. So we're looking at bifacial solar panels. We presently have somewhere between a flat and sloped roof, but we've got about 6,800 square foot of roof space. So looking at how we make the best use for which parts are going to be exterior porches, which parts we're going to use to view the fireworks on the Sternville Festival. Every September in Marietta, we'll plug in for that too. We have a good view of the bridge. But other parts might be best used for solar and using ballast systems so we don't interfere with the roofing systems. But and thankfully, the tax code is such that it's actually advantageous for building owners to consider that, especially at the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, of putting a bifacial solar panel against a roof that's reflective material combined with electrical upgrades, things that we'd probably have to do some degree of in short term. So adding 400 amp service. Things that I have to consider as we move forward, though, do we want to have a centralized meter system, or do we want to create, if we ever have apartments upstairs, do we want to, how do we deal with that as a tenant? Do we trust the tenants to be responsible? Do we put it all as part of one centralized solar system? So those are things we're considering. One of the challenges I've had lately is some of the old trades. It's getting really hard to find folks to do things like window glazing. So there's definitely a career opportunity, I think, in every one of our downtowns. Folks at Heritage Ohio would strongly encourage folks to rebuild those old windows, have a lot of really great old hardwoods if they're capable of doing that instead of doing the vinyl transition. So there's a lot of opportunities for some of the really basic things there as it relates to local materials and recycling and reusing those materials. So I think that's been an important process for us, of not just tearing everything out and starting from scratch, and really looking and taking stock of what's possible and what the best case scenario is for us to be able to preserve history, but also revitalize the spaces and maximize them in a space that's increasingly desired and for utilization purposes. One of the challenges. Yeah, go ahead.
Oops. Let me jump in here, because I guess I didn't want to miss the opportunity. I know that there's a reimagine or revitalize Marietta process going on. Reimagine,
yeah.
Is it?
And it's different than revitalize.
Oh, we'll see. Anyway, how does your project is we're looking very closely there, but then if you expand out away, how do you see that fitting into the overall program? And are you really clued in on that, or is that happening off in the distance and you're not that aware of that project?
I am. We had a meeting the other night in Marietta. I was out of town with work doing another council meeting, but there has been a constant spirit. And I think it's one of the great things about Marietta is there's a lot of passion for the community. It may not be the same passion every given moment, but
right.
We have a lot of really proactive council members who are now being very engaged in the process of looking ahead, trying to figure out how we rebuild infrastructure. We have a mayor who's made the aesthetics of the town a top priority. So looking forward to the waterfront, looking forward to revitalizing the Harmer Bridge, which is a beautiful historic asset. How we embrace the stern wheel culture. But whether it's the historic Lafayette Hotel, we have a new riverboat museum. We currently have one, but it's getting ready to get rebuilt and be even grander than it currently is. So I think all those things are part of the story moving forward, and building an inclusive environment where the city can embrace a really thriving arts and music culture, to where our identity in Appalachia can be further explored as a crossroads, truly, whether it's the ferry boat or the railroad at one time going all the way from Marietta to Cincinnati. There's a lot of those elements that we can reconnect to, and those buildings all have stories to tell, as do the people. So Marietta does a really great job of appreciating the depth of history that's there. And again, you could look at any given decade. Some of it's pleasant, some of it's not so pleasant, like any of our communities. but there is a wealth of history that has occurred in that region. So I think we definitely see those efforts to engage citizens in that process as critical. I applaud our council, applaud members of the city government in taking those on. One of the things I was going to talk about in just a second, I think it's important too, though, is that it's been a challenge, and this is a challenge for every river community, is that there's been changes in the federal codes as it relates to FEMA. So they have been efforts to largely make that a more privately financed venture versus than a federal program. So it presents a real challenge for rebuilding our historic downtowns and riverfront properties to where the level of investment is pretty limited and cost prohibitive, frankly, for the insurance folks have to pay for flood insurance. So that the end result is that a lot of the upstairs properties don't get redeveloped into housing. So I think that'll be the next phase as we try to unpack that and figure out how to fully develop our infrastructure.
Well,
Not only in the ground,
that brings up the item, because I know there are photos of downtown Marietta around, and markers on the side of the walls of perhaps your building saying, here's where the waters got up to, and pictures of people rowing boats past the second story window of your property there. What do you worry about that in the age of climate change, that you're going to put all this money into this property and all of this investment, and then the waters are going to rise up to the second floor?
I do, and I've got the old flood mud in the floorboards to remind me. So as we're working, that's still caked in the upper floors as it seeps through, and it's still there as you tear into some areas that need repair. So for ours, some of that preparation looks like we refer to it as knowing your number. So all of us keep the app on our phone, watch when the flood levels are going up, and really watch and monitor. And the whole downtown community comes together in those times of crisis. So I think that community resiliency is important. A lot of the business owners have gotten really wise as to putting their inventory on wheels, quite literally. So in the event of a flood, if you look at the bottom of a lot of store shelves, they're able to move it out to a truck outside pretty quickly, so they can take it to another location that's not as impacted. And our building, as I mentioned, we have the elevators that gives us the ability to move stuff upstairs more quickly. But I do consider myself what I keep in the building and what I don't, and my ability to, if I'm out of town for work, ability to prepare for something with a couple of days notice. So on that just immediate practical level, it's absolutely our last major flood in Marietta was Ivan back in 2005 or so. And that hit us twice within a pretty short span. And we've had a few close scares, and other parts of the community have seen some flooding, but not downtown proper in a large sense since then, thankfully, knock on wood. So that's always in the back of our minds. Fire is another consideration. There is very limited sprinkler systems. So I think it's an ongoing concern and consideration as folks are redeveloping properties and not doing the wholesale rebuilding of them. We've lost a lot of properties to fire in Marietta, and the ability to rebuild in those locations with all the flood restrictions is really difficult. So you'll see some gaps in the historic blocks, and that's largely the result of that. Now, as somebody who works in the space and climate change is an ever-present thing under consideration, absolutely. So I do my best to try to build durable materials, and the space is going to be impacted, and hope that we don't have to deal with it terribly frequently. But I think that's something for all of us to consider as we rebuild our communities. And we're not alone in being a riverfront town. And we love that we don't have a flood wall. Other communities have chosen to do that. And for us, it gives us really access. And for better or worse, we're connected to that river. And so I think that's part of what we love about the walkability and the bike trail system that goes right against it. But that is the downside, that we are more exposed as a result. So I think it's the community resiliency that's important, and less of a formal way at present. But I think long-term, all of our communities in Southeast Ohio need to be preparing for more water. Yeah.
I want to jump in here and ask you, so it's 10 years from now. Hopefully you've got a 10-year plan.
Sure.
We advise that to anybody who has a business. So 10 years from now, and you stand up on that second floor or up on the roof, what is it that you see has changed in those 10 years in terms of, as you imagine, where are we going as a community, not just a city, but a town, but also the surrounding area? Where will we be in 10 years? What will it look like?
I think it's going to be a vibrancy. So I mentioned those upstairs. We, in a lot of our towns, have moved out of our downtown and permanent residency in those downtown spaces. So I think a higher level of occupancy and the residential components, or what would have been historically commercial showrooms in my case, is now converted to apartments. I think that is going to increase the livability of the communities. We have a lot of great assets right there, and what better way to experience them to live in close proximity to them. I think you're going to see a shift in the transportation sector. So we have the old trolley tracks to remind us that it's not that far removed, that we had an electric trolley system that you could have ridden all the way to Cleveland on. So I think a re-embracement, while we still have the carriage rides and appreciate the quaintness, but we're also embracing moving forward to some technology embrace as well that doesn't have to be in opposition. So I think that's exciting. I think resiliency technology. So having more solar. We have solar currently. A local developer has been really great, several of them actually, but one in particular I'll give a shout out to has been really great about putting some iconic projects. That's a gentleman by the name of Chick Pickering, has made sure that our municipal building has solar, one of our libraries has solar, and that they're in high visibility places where folks know that it's real, the technology works, and it's accessible. The local Unitarian Church has solar on its roof on a very historic building. And it functions in the building very well from an integrated standpoint. So I think seeing more of that as community resiliency, more of that dollars spent on energy staying in the community permanently, and just part of a holistic economy moving forward. So I'm excited for what's next. We're at a period of investment in our downtowns in the region, state and federal, and I'm excited to see what that yields. And I'm glad for a collaborative process with citizens to help shape that. I think that's an important component to that. And I think it's going to be exciting to see what comes forward.
Well, Luke, now you've been sort of a Chamber of Commerce spokesperson here during this, and we're not disagreeing. I mean, it for those of you who are not familiar with Marietta, it's a remarkably quaint, old world walkable town in an area that's not known for that.
It's not the old world.
It is in the fact that people do actually walk, and there is a culture. There's culture here, as my friends always used to say in college, if you want culture, go to Europe, right? So
we went to Marietta.
Yeah, we went to Marietta instead. But in any big project, what are the things that you wish you had known or the horror stories as you've been developing your specific site that you just want to sort of never repeat?
Well, I'm going to avoid a few of them, but
well, you've only got 30 seconds to tell us here.
Oh, well, great. Well, I'd say long term, capital access is always an ongoing issue within these properties. And I think these properties, in large part across the region, have not been to the level of standard of care that they needed. So a lot of it is a passion of love of doing the repairs, and I think not being overwhelmed over that overnight. I think getting support from officials and understanding as we're working through that process is an important element. So I think that's something that needs to occur everywhere as we rebuild our downtowns. But yeah, I'm right in the thick of it right now. So without going in the weeds too much, I'd say just overall one step at a time.
All right. Well, time has saved you from all of reliving those horrors. Well, you've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank our guest today, Luke Sulfridge, who has been working on revitalizing his little part of downtown Marietta. And we want to thank our Emmy Award winning and always revitalized producer, Adam Rich. And thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and Jay, eat some vegetables this week.
All right. Until next time.
See the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in twilight. Soon we'll be together. All will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing and the children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.